Hello everybody and welcome back to another Marvel Crisis Protocol character spotlight. Today we are taking a look at another one of the new core box characters. This is the second one of those characters to hit this series. And that character is, of course, Captain Marvel Cosmic Avenger. And yeah, I think we're just going to go ahead and get right into the card here. We'll talk about everything on both sides of her card, normal and binary form, of course. And then we'll go ahead and we'll talk about some synergies, tactics cards, and things like that that she likes to play. So, first of all, Carol here, just to make things simpler, both sides of the card are the same for both normal and binary forms, so we're not going to bother looking at the flip side of the card because nothing changes, so we don't have to worry about that at all. But, real quick, we're going to run through her basic stats here. She has 444 for defense, she's got 7 health, she's got 5 threat, she's size 2, and she's a medium move, so relatively standard line there. 444 is always nice to see, it's a good defensive line. 7 health is a solid kind of middle ground for most 5 threats, so that's pretty solid. And then we're going to go into her attacks here. She's got 2 attacks on her normal mode. These are both builder attacks, so she's going to gain power based on the damage dealt. The first one is a range 4 5 dice energy attack, which has a wild pursuit trigger, which reads before damage is dealt. This character may advance towards the target character small, so solid ability there. Helps her get closing the distance a little bit with a range 4 5 dice builder. Can't complain about that. That's quite a solid attack. Next, she has Sonic Boom. This is a range 3 physical attack, but it's 6 dice this time, and it has Wild Concussive. After this attack is resolved, the target character loses 1 power. So solid there, not quite as good as something like a Sap power or anything like that, but a very solid ability nonetheless. So yeah, two solid builders here. I mean, 6 dice builders are always good, range 4 and range 3, so neither of them are super close combat either. So she's going to have no problem really getting in and starting to get these builders rolling nice and early. Next, she has enhanced energy absorption. When this character is defending against an energy or mystical attack for each wild in the defense roll, it may change one of the attacker's crits, wilds, or hits to a blank. This character will gain 1 power for each die changed this way. So she's basically got a reverse pierce, and she gains power for doing it, which is really, really good. It makes that 4 dice on energy and mystic even better. So she can take a decently sized hit on the energy or mystic side. Next, she has Higher, Further, Faster. At the start of this character's activation, if it has 6 or more power, it transforms into Captain Marvel Cosmic Avenger binary. So that's how she transforms to the other side. Basically, at the start of her turn, she has to have 6 or more. Note that means you can't, start on 5, do a builder, gain up, and then switch. So unlike the old Carol, this one needs to have the power going into their turn, which is kind of a big deal. One of the few kind of limitations that she has on her kit here, which helps her kind of be a little more balanced, because if she could flip halfway through a turn, oh boy, she'd be a monster. But yeah, so she's got to have the 6 or more power at the start of her turn to switch over, and it is notably 6 power, unlike old Carol where she was getting binary, which was just a token. After, I want to say 4 power was what it was. Been a while since I've played old Carol, but anyways. Next, she has You Call That a Punch. When this character is dealt damage by an enemy effect, after the effect is resolved, it gains 1 power. So basically ornery, that sort of ability. So if she gets hit, she's going to gain extra power for being hit, which is really, really nice for Carol here because she really wants to get up to that 6 as soon as possible. And you'll see why when we take a look at binary form. Next, she has Flight, Immunity, Incinerate, and Poison. So obviously all good things there. Incinerate's an amazing immunity to have. Poison's pretty solid for a model like this that really wants to be gaining power as fast as possible. And Flight is just a good keyword. So that is it for Carol Danvers normal here. She's got solid builders, but absolutely nothing to spend her power on, which is good because she wants to save all of it up for when she can flip over to that binary form here. So let's go ahead and take a look at what changes in binary form. So first things first, her basic stat line doesn't change at all here. She's still 444-752 medium, so we're not going to talk about that at all. But her attacks completely change. All of a sudden, she has no free attacks, so everything she wants to do on this side is going to cost her some power. So first attack is Binary Blast. This is a range 2 6 dice attack. It costs you 1 power. After the attack is resolved, this character pushes the target character small. Note that that's any size and there's no trigger for that, so really, really powerful control ability there. It's got a Wild Incinerate. After the attack is resolved, the target character will gain the Incinerate condition, which is solid. That's a really powerful condition to be handing out like that for a 1-cost attack, so quite good there. Next, she has Warbird. This is kind of her real spender. So this one costs 3. It's going to be 8 dice. It's going to throw at range 3. After the attack is resolved, she's going to place within 2 of the target character. After the attack is resolved on a wild, she'll also get to throw the target character small. And then a crit wild trigger for explosive, which is before damage is dealt. Other enemy characters within range 2 of the target suffer 1. So really important to note that while the explosive has to trigger first, the throw and the place can go in either order because they're both after this attack is resolved. So if you like where they're standing and, maybe they're on an objective or something, you can place yourself on that objective and then throw them. Or if you want to throw them to a position where maybe you'll be able to punch something else that you want to punch, you can throw them first, then teleport to them and then punch. So that's a really important little timing thing there is you have the flexibility to choose which order you want to go with that, which can be really, really nice. It's going to give you some extra versatility. Once again, this wild throw is any size, which is fantastic. So again, a really powerful control ability there. It only needs a wild on 8 dice, so that's quite solid. Yeah, just overall a really, really solid spender there. Next, she has a handful of superpowers here. So the first one is I'm just getting warmed up. This costs her 2 power. Choose an interactive terrain feature or enemy character, both of size 4 or less and within range 2, and throw it medium. Superpower can only be used once per turn. So very, very standard here. Character or terrain throw size 4 or less. Throwing medium is always great, and she's only spending 2 power to do it, so definitely a really solid throw here. Great control, great for getting extra damage in if you just want to throw some size 4, terrain or characters at each other. Yeah, just a really solid little addition to her kit here. Helps her get some extra damage, helps her get even more control on top of the throw and push that she has from her initial attacks there, so that's quite solid. Next, she has Ready or Not. This is a 0-cost active superpower. It's going to take 1 action, but it lets her make a move action followed by an attack action. So basically, it's a free charge. 0-cost charge is really, really good, especially because her kit does operate mostly at closer range here, range 2 and range 3 notably. So yeah, she's gonna be moving around the battlefield very, very quickly between this and Warbird. She can kind of be wherever she wants to be by the end of her turn, which is absolutely fantastic, while still putting out 2 powerful attacks. So that's really, really good. She's got tons of mobility on that, which is awesome. Next, she has I don't need a power up to kick your butt. This one costs 0. When she spends or loses power after the effect is resolved, if she has 3 or less power, she may use this superpower and transform back. So very, very notably here, this is a May ability. If you want to run yourself down to 0 power and then call your turn with her there, you don't have to switch her back into normal form. If you have leaderships or abilities that are going to help you ramp up her power again next turn, or even you just want to, do the binary blast as your first attack next activation, and then because you spent the 1 for it, switch back, your power phase, power generation, you're more than welcome to do that with Carol here. She can stay in binary form to get that one last, heck, maybe you want, she runs out of power on this round. Next round, she gains her power up. She's gonna do her free charge into a binary blast, and then she transforms back. So she's still got a lot of versatility, even on that when she starts getting low on power. Once she's hit binary form, she's got a lot of options available to her, which is really, really cool. Next, she has the enhanced energy absorption. This is the only way she can gain power other than taking damage on this side of her card, which is the exact same as it was on the front card. So basically the reverse pierce where she'll gain power for doing it. So that's really, really solid. It helps keep her going a little bit if your opponent's trying to hit her on energy or mystical, and also just keeps her alive, which is fantastic. Next, for the most part, this stays the same. She's got flight, and then she still has immunity to incinerate and poison, but she also picks up an immunity to stagger and stun, which is really, really good. Obviously, stun being a condition that this Carol does not enjoy having. The somewhat awkward part about this is, of course, she has immunity to stun on the side where she doesn't build power very quickly anymore, but that's okay. It's still a solid immunity that, just flipping into this form and then being able to flip back to her normal form will kind of, just basically shake that stun off of you for effectively free. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, overall, she hits like an absolute truck on this side of her card. She's got crazy amounts of movement, crazy amounts of control, and yeah, she's just a really, really powerful piece when she gets into her binary form. And her normal form isn't exactly pillow fisted either. I mean, no spender is a thing, but she does have access to 6 dice builders, which are quite solid. They've got concussive or 5 dice with pursuit if she prefers. So those are quite good. She's got some solid defensive tech. She's really going to be able to push herself into that other form faster with you call that a punch. a lot of the times your opponent's not going to want to punch her at all until she's already flipped, because otherwise they're just fueling her up, but she's still going to be running around making 5 and 6 dice attacks. So she's still going to be doing meaningful things in those turns where she hasn't gone binary yet, which is kind of one of the problems that the old Carol faced. And when she does go binary, I mean, she hits like a truck. She has some fantastic control effects. I realized that I flipped the card instead of going to binary. Um, she has fantastic control effects. She hits like an absolute truck. She's handing out really solid conditions through Incinerate. She's got mobility for days. She's got terrain throws, character throws, everything. Yeah, this Carol is an absolute workhorse of a model. She does a lot of work in all the games that I've played her. So let's talk real quick about, first of all, let's look at her Team Connected cards here. So she has access to On Patrol, which is a card she shares with Spider-Woman. They can spend 2 during the power phase to play this card, and then whenever an enemy character interacts with an objective token this round, Carol and Spider-Woman are allowed to advance small. So this is an interesting card for her. On one hand, she loves being able to get to the fight a little bit faster. If you could play this early on, it would be fantastic. On the other hand, she doesn't love having to spend 2 power for it, so you'd probably prefer to be playing it off of Spider-Woman, which I guess gives her a half-decent synergy with Spider-Woman right out the gate there. Um, the other problem with this is you have to play it during the power phase though, so you can't usually do it round 1, because obviously in the power phase you only have 1 power on both of these models, so you don't have any way of playing this card unless you have some very specific things that can help you get this online faster. Specifically something like a Dormammu leadership, but this is kind of an awkward list to be bringing with Dormammu, because then you're bringing Carol, Spider-Woman, which is 9 threat with an 8 threat leader, and that's getting very, very tall very, very quickly. So I don't know if that's necessarily the best combo in the world. So unfortunately, I find On Patrol isn't her best card. There's niche situations where it might be okay, but I really don't think she loves spending the extra 2 power for it. She also has access to Overcharge. This is something that she can do during her activation or during Thor's activation. And you have to have an allied Tony Stark that's within 5 of them. The interesting part about this is she has to spend 5 power to play it. So while it does give Tony a pretty solid attack that she gets to make, outside of using an action and stuff like that, which can be solid in the right situation, she really doesn't want to spend 5 power to do this, because, I mean, that's basically turning off her entire kit, right? So it can be a bit of an awkward choice for this card. I don't think it's a bad card necessarily in a vacuum. I think it's better with Old Carol, and it's probably better with Thor even. But yeah, Carol, it's just a little too expensive for her to be willing to pay this most of the time, I find. So unfortunately, her named cards I don't think are anything particularly crazy for her. But let's go ahead and we'll take a look at the affiliation she's a part of and see which leaders she might like running under, or which specific synergies there are. So first of all, we have Avengers. And of course, Avengers has a lot of different leaderships to go around here. So we'll kind of talk about them one by one. First of all, there is Steve Rogers' original leadership. So this is, you're going to reduce the first superpower you use cost by 1. This is okay for Carol. I don't think it's particularly great for her. I mean, it's definitely not bad. It doesn't hurt her in any way. But if you look on the front side of her card, there's nothing she's spending any power on. And if you go into the binary form, the only thing this is actually helping you with is that terrain or character throw. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world. Like, it's not an actively bad choice to bring her under Steve, but she really doesn't get anything out of it. The only bonus I think she really gets from being run under Steve 1 is that Steve 1 is a bodyguard who can kind of take some of those physical attacks off of her, which can be solid there because, I mean, for physical defense with no actual tech is solid, but she can still go down very, very quickly if you're not careful. So having access to that isn't bad, but I don't think there's really much in the way of a powerful synergy there in any way. Next, we have Sam, and Sam's leadership is, of course, when allied characters are dazed or KO'd, you're going to choose another allied character. They're going to get to remove a damage, remove a special condition, and advance small. I do think this is quite solid for Carol. She's not necessarily the type of model that Sam likes to run. Sam likes to run a very wide Avengers team with lots of lower threat models. She is a bit on the higher threat end for him, but she does really appreciate that leadership. All 3 of those things are really important for her: movement, healing, and condition removal. If she hasn't gotten over to her binary form yet, stun is an absolutely crippling condition on her. Even in her binary form, Root can be a really, really rude condition. So if your opponent's running either of those, being able to remove them off of her is absolutely huge. The healing is nice because she does have a good health pool, but also having damage come into her gives her power faster, which is a big deal. So being able to kind of increase that a little bit more can help a little bit. And then also the movement doesn't hurt in any way, just being able to get her around the table faster again before she gets into that binary form. So I don't think it's a bad leadership for her by any means. Once again, though, I think it's kind of a leadership that does similar things for her that it does for everyone else. Next, we have Steve 3, so Captain America First Avenger. This is, of course, the new one. And his is where you get to, if you have any hits in the attack roll, you can spend one power to change one of your other dice to another result. This is solid for her. It's a little awkward sometimes because she doesn't love spending the power to do it. But in terms of her builders, it's basically guaranteeing she gets her trigger. And if she was already doing damage, she's just going to refund herself that power anyways. So it's pretty solid for that. Going into the binary side, here, of course, she's not refunding her power for doing it, but it can still be worth it. Sometimes you really, really need that throw or the incinerate, and you just don't happen to roll it in the base attack. So being able to kind of just push it through for one extra power. Again, she doesn't love having to spend that power, but it's still very, very solid ability just to have that in the toolkit. And because it's an optional thing, of course, you do get to kind of make that judgment call of, do I need this right now, or do I need to save the power so that way I can stay in binary longer, or I can get back to binary faster, or whatever it is. So I think it's a solid leadership for her. Out of the Avengers ones, it's probably her favorite leadership, although I do think Sam's is still a contender for that. And then, of course, the last one is Hulkbuster. We're not really going to talk about Hulkbuster's leadership too much, but basically just reduce damage from collisions by one. That's not awful for her. I mean, I just think it's kind of similar to what it does for everybody, so it's not particularly too impressive for her. Outside of the leaders, I think she has a couple okay synergies here. I mean, obviously, we already mentioned Spider-Woman has some half-decent synergies with her just because of the tactics card. Otherwise, I think there's some other okay ones. I do think she appreciates having something like a bodyguard to be able to peel off some of those physical attacks from her, especially once she starts rolling and your opponent's more willing to punch her. You don't typically want to pull off those physical attacks when she hasn't reached binary form yet because you actually want to gain the power for taking those hits. But once she has, and once your opponent's actually trying to take her down, having something like Luke Cage or Iron Fist who can heroes for higher in, or as I mentioned before, just Steve Rogers 1, can be really, really useful for just kind of keeping her going. Um, Otherwise, I don't think there's anything too huge in the way of specific synergies. I mean, there's always things you can do, like, anyone with any sort of control effect, for example, could throw stuff towards her to make it easier for her to punch them. Um, so that sort of thing could be helpful here and there, but for the most part, I don't think there's anything too crazy. She's a very solid piece, but she's also a very independent piece, so I don't think she really cares too much about what most of the other Avengers models are doing for her. Taking a look at her other affiliation, however, A-Force here, and suddenly I think she's got access to probably one of her favorite leaderships in the entire game, which is, of course, She-Hulk's leadership. When an allied character is damaged by an enemy effect, another allied character may gain a power. A character may not gain more than one power from this leadership per turn. Note that that's per turn, not per round. So every time anyone that isn't Carol gets punched, Carol's going to get damage. And every time Carol is punched, she's not going to get damage, she's going to get power. Anytime Carol is punched, she's going to gain an extra power for having taken damage, and one of your other models is going to gain a power. I think that leadership under her is absolutely ridiculous. I think she's going to gain so much power so quickly, and she's really just going to be a menace to your opponent. In a similar vein, she also has access to bodyguard in the form of She-Hulk there. Mind you, She-Hulk can be a little on the squishy side herself sometimes, so you don't always want to do it, especially because She-Hulk's not particularly in love with physical attacks. But it is a solid extra thing that you can have access to there. So there's at least some synergy with the leader. I think the biggest problem there being you have an 11 threat start there if you're bringing those two models. So you really got to be careful what threat values you're playing that out and what sort of scenario, because you don't want to let yourself fall too far behind because of that. But I do think that leadership is absolutely bonkers for her. It does so much work, and I do think She-Hulk's a solid model to synergize with her. You also gain access to special delivery here, where Carol is a model with flight. So while Carol doesn't love spending the power first turn for it, she is a model that can drop She-Hulk into the middle of the table. And I mean, of all the affiliations where you can afford to spend the power on a tactics card like that, A-Force is definitely one of them. So yeah, I think she's very, very solid here. Spider-Woman's also here, so she has that same kind of synergy. She also has a Quay for another bodyguard style model if she needs. So those are good things. I don't think she has particular synergies with any of the other models. But I don't think there's anti-synergies. I just think she's a very independent model and doesn't really need very many other models supporting her. I mean, she definitely appreciates some rerolls from something like Shuri, help her build power a little bit faster, so that can be quite solid. I think Crystal can hand out Incinerate in one of her attacks, if I remember correctly. Yeah, she can. And that can again just help her build up some power a little bit faster. So there's some small things here and there, but nothing too huge. I do just think this is probably one of her favorite leaderships in the game. And I mean, even some of the other effects are quite solid. Stuff like the card that won't let her be pushed or thrown for a round is really nice, and then the stuff to buff their defense when they kind of can ball up like that. I think that's a Force Assemble that does that. Really, really solid card for Carol here as well because she's already got pretty solid defensive stats, so being able to just kind of crank that up to 11 is really, really good. But yeah, I think this is definitely her favorite home affiliation. The A Force leadership is just so good for her, and I look forward to trying it myself soon because it seems really, really strong and a good way to just basically say she's constantly going to be able to keep going. Outside of A Force in Avengers, I think there's a couple of leaderships where she works really well. I think really anything that's going to give her power is a huge deal for her. So I mean, I already kind of mentioned her under Dormammu and Dark Dimension, and I don't think that's a terrible spot for her. I don't think it's the best either because she does want to be hitting that six power quite often. So I mean, it's not amazing for her, but it is something that gives her power. She doesn't mind Emma Frost for similar reasons, just being able to gain a little bit of extra power as well. Some healing every turn is quite nice. Red Skull, one in Cabal. And then, of course, the really obvious one here is Inhumans. Black Bolt leadership, being able to just funnel power into her like crazy is going to be really, really good for a model like this. So, yeah, I think Black Bolt leadership is probably one of the better ones for her. It's right up there with A-Force's leadership. And then in a similar vein as that, Cyclops X-Men actually, I think is a place where she potentially has a really good home there. Um, that's just another place where she has access to a lot of power coming off of, every time any of your X-Men members deal damage, they're going to throw some power her way. And then she'll help kind of return the favor when she gets binary form going. She's going to be throwing out power to the other models. And the important thing to note about all three of those leaderships there, A-Force, Inhumans, and Cyclops X-Men, is that they're going to allow her to gain power while she's in binary form, so she never really has to leave, which is a big deal because, I mean, if you can just keep those warbirds going all game, she's going to be hitting like an absolute truck. She's going to have crazy amounts of control going on, crazy amounts of mobility, and yeah, she's just going to be an absolutely solid model. So yeah, I think those are kind of some of her favorite homes. I'm sure there's others. I'm sure she's good in a lot of places. Other models that synergize particularly well with her would be just anyone else who can kind of help get her some power early on. I'm really just thinking about Wong when I say that. Um, Wong is a solid model to help her get going up the table relatively quickly. I'm sure there's others. I just can't think of them right now. Um, but yeah, she's going to be able to benefit from stuff like that. If you have models that can put her into fighting range, a little bit sooner, so maybe she could double tap turn one with like a Lockjaw or a Red Skull 3 or something like that. She doesn't mind that either. That's quite solid for her. Just help her get her own power generation going. Similar vein, something like Guardians or even original Spider Foes leadership, where you're just going to be pushing through a little bit of extra damage and stuff like that can be really, really solid. So yeah, I think she's a very self-sufficient model. She doesn't particularly need support from specific characters or leaders, but there are some that will really help push her over 11, which is fantastic for her. Next, going into tactics cards, there's not really too much like specific things that she needs. We already talked about her character ones. She doesn't hate advanced R&D, just giving her a little bit of extra power sooner. I don't think it's quite worth doing though, because it really doesn't turn on any specific like turn one plays or anything like that. So that's not amazing for her. One card I do think she really appreciates though is Sacrifice as far as restricted cards go. So Sacrifice, for those unaware, basically lets her bodyguard an attack by having her and the original target pay one. Alternatively, she can use it defensively to throw an attack onto an ally instead. So this can be really nice for her. Of course, you wanna kind of gauge when to use it properly because she does have to pay one power to use this card. But if your opponent's playing that game, if they're just trying to ignore Carol and hope she doesn't get to binary soon enough, then you can sacrifice attacks into her to get her there faster. You just want to make sure you're relatively careful when you do this. You don't want to put an attack into her that's going to kill her, obviously. And you also don't want to put an attack into her that is not going to do any damage, because if it does no damage, then she's wasted a power now, basically, right? So you've got to be somewhat careful with when you use this. I think it's a really good idea to use this against, a relatively hard-hitting energy or mystical attack, for example, because then what's going to happen is if they do a couple damage to you because it's a high dice attack, that's fine. You're going to gain a bunch of power for that, which is great. Alternatively, you block really well, you get some of those wilds, you're going to turn down some of their results, and then because of that, you're going to gain power from that anyways. So hopefully one of those two things happen. Of course, there is that world where you just block really well without any wilds, or they completely whiff the attack roll or something like that. That could always happen, but I think overall it's still a solid play to just try and force an attack onto her as early as you can. Just to get her rolling quickly, because once she starts rolling, she's not going to stop. She's going to get into your opponent's face, and they're going to be forced to deal with her, which means you're going to start taking damage, and then she'll be online and she'll be self-sufficient after that. So yeah, I think that's kind of the main ones. I already briefly mentioned some of the tactics cards in her affiliations, such as A Force Assemble, Stalwart Determination. Those sorts of cards are quite solid with her, but I don't think there's really anything else that she particularly needs in as far as tactics cards go. Um, there's other cards that I'm sure are solid with her, but nothing really super specific. So I think that's about as far as we need to go with tactics cards. Last thing for Carol we'll talk about here is crises cards and which type of scenarios she likes. So, I mean, first of all, she does have some amazing control abilities, so she has no problem playing on something like a research station or something like an EMAP like Demons, where she's immune to Incinerate, or Gamma. These are great places for her. She's got some fantastic control once she gets rolling on that flip side, and with the Pursuit, she can hopefully get onto those middle points nice and early. So she's solid for stuff like that. I also think she's quite good on something like Infinity Formula. Infinity Formula, she's very capable of kind of, sitting on that point, hopefully getting some range 4 blasts out so she can build up a little faster. She's going to gain up power from that Infinity Formula worst case scenario, so she'll be online a little faster than normal. And yeah, that just helps get her rolling a little bit sooner. She's not a huge fan of pay to flip. She doesn't like paying the power for it, obviously, so that's not a crazy thing for her. She also, I don't think, is super in love with the D-maps, because until she gets rolling on that flip side, she doesn't have access to crazy amounts of mobility. So you really don't want her having to waste all this time moving around and stuff like that. So she can be a little awkward on those maps, but yeah, similarly, superpowered scoundrels I don't think is her favorite thing in the world, because they're going to have cover from her attacks, which means she's going to build power slower, so that's not great either. So she really likes things like Formula or EMAPs, or even Mayor Fisk. I think to some degree is okay with her. You just got to be really careful to avoid that stun. But yeah, I think she's really just try to avoid the D-maps, avoid pay to flips if you can. Um, but she's good on a lot of the other maps there. Then going into other extracts, I already mentioned Research Station being good for her, just because she's got a lot of control, which is solid. I don't think she hates hammers. She doesn't, again, I don't love wasting move actions on her to make her go grab like the side ones or something like that. But if you can get her to grab the back one, she'll be hitting a little harder. That'll help get her kit online a little faster, which is solid. I think she's quite all right with Montesi formula. She's probably not using the book attack very often herself, but she can definitely take the book attack very reasonably, so I think that's solid for her. Mutant extremists target U.S. senators is all right for her. She's got tons of mobility outside of actual move actions, so she's pretty good for that one. And then struggle for the cube is of course another solid one with her, where she's just going to gain power a little bit faster. So I think that's great for her. But as far as extracts go, I really don't think there's any that she hates. Um, she's not a huge fan of kind of having to double move to do things because she likes to be able to attack turn one if she can. So I mean, stuff where it's going to be mostly middle line focused, I don't think is her favorite thing in the world, but it's also not the end of the world for her. She's very capable of playing on those still. So yeah, I don't think she's extremely picky when it comes to extracts and even secures. While there's some that she favors, I don't think she's necessarily bad on the other ones. So yeah, I think overall she's a relatively well-rounded model when it comes to crises. So going back, we'll pull up Carol again here. Um, but yeah, so that was Carol. I think I've kind of said my piece on her. I've already had a handful of games with this model, and she does a lot of work. She's a very, very powerful piece once she gets rolling. Your opponent has to take her seriously because once she gets going, she's going to be hitting like an absolute truck. She's going to be all over the map. She's going to be throwing and shoving your models off points like crazy. She's a menacing model once she gets rolling. You just really got to help her get there. Kind of similar to the original Carol, except I find this one, once she gets there, she's a little more self-sufficient. She's better at staying there. Whereas older Carol kind of runs into that problem of just like she gets there and then she's back to square one again, which is always a little unfortunate. But this one I think does really really good once she has it going, and even before that she's still throwing out. I keep trying to flip the card instead of going to normal. She's still throwing out 5 and 6 dice builder attacks, which are quite solid. I mean, with the pursuit and concussive as well, just to give you some extra things. She's got some solid defensive tech, nothing too crazy. She will still die if you're not careful with her, which is why I do recommend things like bodyguards, or even, defensively using sacrifice and things like that can be quite solid with her. She's really, really good in, I think, both of her home affiliations, but especially A Force. I think A Force is probably her favorite place to be. I think she hits like an absolute truck there. She's going to be always in binary form. Yeah, I think she does ridiculous things under A Force and any of those other leaderships we talked about. But yeah, I think she's a really solid rounded model. She is very self-sufficient. Once she gets going, she's going to be able to keep herself there for a while. She appreciates some leaderships, but I don't think she's a bad splash outside of those leaderships. I think, I've run her a lot under Steve One Avengers, and I've run her I think once or twice under Sam at this point, and she feels great under them, even though their leaderships don't really help her all that much getting rolling. She's still just a very solid model, and she'll perform on her own quite well. So yeah, I think I've pretty much said my piece when it comes to Carol here. So I think that is going to pretty much do it for this or I almost said battle report for this character spotlight. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please do drop a like down below. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. We do character spotlights like these pretty much every week, and we do battle reports on the weekends. So if you're interested in either more of these or battle reports or other things like that, feel free to go ahead and subscribe. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you in future videos there. But yeah, let me know down below in the comments if you've gotten to try out Carol and what your thoughts on her are. Personally, she's very quickly becoming my favorite model in the new core box. I absolutely love playing this model, and I also just think the model is absolutely beautiful. I love the way the two models for her kind of flow into each other. I think it's absolutely amazing. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of Carol. Have you gotten to try her? Has she done some really cool things for you? Love to hear about all of that down below. So yeah, I think that's gonna wrap this video though. That's it for me. So until next time, everybody, have a great day. Peace.